Welcome. We're glad you're joining us for Module 5 of Bible X, where we will begin studying the New Testament. In this module, we will explore 4 books that tell us about the life of Christ. We won't be studying all 4 books in detail, but instead we will learn from specific stories. In today's session, we will spend time on important issues that help us better understand these books. The books of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John are called Gospels. The term gospel means good news, and was first used to describe the life of Christ in the book of Mark. It also refers to a very special letter or announcement that only went out when the Emperor of Rome won a crucial victory or a new emperor had risen to power. Because of these descriptions, we can get a sense of Christ's victory and power when Mark uses the term gospel to speak of Christ, which we'll learn about when we get to his book. Now that we know the term gospel means good news, let's explore the concept further. Many people read the Bible with assumptions or expectations. So let's talk about how to read the Gospels. The Gospels are a mixture of 3 things. First, they are people recounting the past. Specifically, they are recalling the life and work of Christ. Second, they are a form of biography. They focus not on the time or land in which Jesus lived, but specifically on the person of Christ. Third, they are theologically centered. They show the will and activity of God in time and how that shapes our lives. That said, we must be clear what a gospel is not. So many assumptions about what the Bible actually is leads to confusion and disappointment when it does not do what we want it to do. The Gospels are not strict history, like a textbook written for a college history class. The Gospel writers were not thinking about writing something that you could enter in a court of law. While we should not view the Gospels as modern history books, they are grounded in events that happened in the past, therefore proving that the life of Christ did take place. However, the writers were more focused on showing what the life of Christ meant to their communities, not writing a literal history book. Recognizing these points helps us avoid a lot of debates and arguments that do not enrich our faith. Since we are talking about tough issues, let's respond to some valid questions people typically have about stories found in the Gospels. Some will reject the message of the Gospels since there are variations in the way the same story is told. For example, your reading explored the birth of Christ, a teaching of Christ called the Beatitudes, and the death of Christ. Do you remember how the story differed in each of these accounts? When you read about the birth of Christ, you may have noted how Matthew said Magi, or wise men, came to see Jesus. But in Luke, it was the working shepherds. In the Beatitudes passage, Matthew emphasized spiritual qualities while Luke stressed physical ones. In the description of the robbers at the crucifixion, Matthew said both robbers rejected Jesus, while in Luke, one of them praised and submitted to Christ. Although these are some examples of variation within Scripture, they are not the only illustrations of this found in the Bible. There are 3 ways we can respond to these differences. First, we can deny that there are any differences. However, reading Scripture makes this hard to do. One could say that all of the Gospels are saying the same thing, but wise men are not shepherds, spiritual qualities are not physical ones, and cursing and accepting Christ are clearly 2 different things. Second, we can attempt to resolve the differences, but this requires intellectual gymnastics. A person could say that one writer was confused, or that something happened before or later that was not recorded, but these responses are a bit dishonest and actually create more problems than they solve. If a person follows this line of thinking, they can cast aside or modify any portion of the Bible they are uncomfortable with by simply saying information was left out or the author got his facts mixed up. Third, we can embrace these differences because they actually benefit us. They are the product of the way God gives us Scripture to help us better understand the life of Christ and its impact on our lives. Do you recall the first question asked in this week's reading? 2 different people would talk about your life in different ways, depending on how they were related to you, wouldn't they? Likewise, the differences in the Gospels should be celebrated because they reflect how the life of Christ affects different communities, in different places, at different times. In fact, what use would there be in having 4 books repeat the same thing in the same way? Since we are dealing with tough issues concerning reading the Gospels, let's address one that impacts all of Scripture. Critics of faith and the Bible question how much can we trust Scripture. They point to variations in the earliest versions of the Bible and problems that are present. An honest faith requires us to say that, yes, there are some variations in Scripture. The two most significant ones in the Bible occur in the Gospels, and you read them both. One is called the longer ending of Mark, and the other is the story in John of the woman caught in adultery. In the Gospel of Mark, many Bibles will have a footnote that say the earliest versions of the book did not contain chapter 16, verses 9 to 20, a portion called the longer ending of Mark. The other significant variation is in John chapter 7, verse 53, through chapter 8, verse 11, the story of the woman caught in adultery. It too was added after the book of John was written. Because of the way the Bible was recorded and handed down, we know what the earliest versions of the Bible said. These two examples and other minor differences are called textual variants. Some will use the issue of textual variants to question your faith, or even their own faith. However, this is making a big deal out of a small issue. First, the number of these textual variants is amazingly insignificant when compared to the overwhelming majority of Scripture. In most cases, textual variants are simply a different word here or there. The fact that the majority of Scripture has stayed the same and that we can compare our copies with the earliest ones should encourage your trust of the Bible. Second, the modern study of the Bible has helped us identify and locate these variants and restore or note the original reading. Third, these textual variants do not affect the teachings of our faith. The Christian faith remains the same regardless of what word is used. To reject Scripture and your faith because of textual variants is like throwing away a car because of one flat tire. Okay, so we've dealt with some questions surrounding the Gospels. Let's focus on the Gospels themselves. The 4 Gospels are put into 2 categories. The first is the Synoptic Gospels and includes Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The second is the Gospel of John, which is by itself. There are a couple of reasons for this, and your reading might have hinted at them. First, it's clear that the Synoptic Gospels somehow shared material when they were written. This is not a big issue for our study, but know that the sharing of material in their creation is a common point of discussion. This is called the synoptic problem. There are a number of theories about how this happened, but no one knows for sure. More importantly, it's not essential to our faith. Second, John is set apart not only because he wrote his gospel independent of the other 3, but also because it is written very differently, with a unique emphasis. Do you recall your comparison of the first 3 gospels? The synoptics started the way they are supposed to start, with once upon a time kind of beginnings. However, imagine you have never heard the beginning of the Gospel of John before. It is different, mystical, and mysterious. In many ways, John's Gospel is different in style and emphasis from the synoptics. Therefore, it is set apart by itself. In the next session, we'll jump into the book of Matthew. Until then, take some time to work through the relational questions and apply what you have learned to your life.